Yeah. Sound set.
Yeah. The battery was dead.
Oh,
Yeah, I know.
Anyways. So for our scripted idea, we're having a film called
Where the Fairies Smoke.
It's a 10-minute fantasy coming-of-age period drama targeted at a young adult audience. The logline is: blinded in the final weeks of World War II, Noir creates an imaginary fantasy world to substitute for her war hospital reality, only to find out that even her imagination is poisoned by the fears, personified in the Mocking Fairy. So the main setting for the film will be 1945 London. Nora will be in the war hospital for the film. So 1945 London will only be established through sound and some blurry images in the beginning of the film. So for the main visuals, we will be exploring the fantasy world, which is Nora's magical interpretation of the reality. So whatever we will be hearing from the real world will be appearing on the screen as a part of magical elements. Obviously, we will be including some magical elements sound-wise as well. In terms of our act structure, the story is as follows. Being old enough, Nora is asked to help the nurses. However, because she's blind, she's too scared. To calm her down, the nurse starts telling her story about a fairy world, but soon needs to leave. In her distorted mind and visual impairment, Nora imagines that world visually, as she's unable to see the real one anymore. She finds herself in a fantasy castle, and Nora seeks to find the moon. She's quickly met by the Mocking Fairy, who gives him magical errands instead. Nora refuses, but the fairy warns her that she will need to leave if she doesn't obey. And because Nora doesn't need to leave, she starts performing the task. At the command of the fairy, Nora performs small tasks, being promised to be made into a real fairy, to be shown where the moon is. She's laughed at and spooked by the other fairies. Nora tolerates until she's asked to knit magical yarn, resembling the word sewing process in the real world. Nora gets extremely terrified, as this is what's been terrifying her in the reality. Nora realizes that to get to the moon, she needs to leave this place, even though she doesn't want to, resembling how she doesn't want to escape her fantasy world and her childhood dreams. Suddenly, in Act 3, sounds get louder, shadows distort even more. In the real world, people celebrate the end of the war, but distracted and overwhelmed by the sounds, Nora is haunted in the fantasy labyrinth by the fairy. Essentially, people are celebrating, making loud noises. However, Nora does not realize what is happening, and for her, it's resembling the bomb noises from before. Nora's only option is to leave the castle to escape all of this. However, she's stuck. She's shaken off every sound that goes off. In the real world, we see images of Nora's lost face and fireworks reflections over it, as fireworks is something that in the beginning of the script will be mentioned as what she used to like to see before the war started, creating a circular timeline throughout the script. Imagination is the only weapon in the war against reality, is the character's belief.
Nora is a protagonist, 18, blind and lost in the outside dark world. A dysfunctional young adult since she grew up during the wartime, seeking escape into the fantasy world.
The Mocking Fairy. It is our antagonist, who will be resembling the nurse and will have the voice of the nurse, as we'll hear from the beginning. She sends Nora spiraling in this fantasy world with the best intentions. However, she's the antagonist because Nora does indeed need to grow up. So the reason we're making this film right now is because there's a trend with nostalgia-driven live-action films created by Disney, which is targeted at Gen Z and millennials who just don't want to grow up and want to remain kids for as long as possible. Why are we the right people to make this project happen, even though fantasy films are quite difficult to make? Is because we are fantasy genre enthusiasts with experiences on working on films with magical aspects or some sort of different to our world. And for me personally, if I was directing this, I do have experiences with the fantasy genre, and I really want to make a proper film within the fantasy genre, having done it before, just not on a larger scale like this.
The World War II narrative settings serve as a foundation for sound design. It will all be rooted in Nora's perspective as someone whose hearing is heightened as a result of her blindness. Her desire to escape intensifies her already vivid imagination, defining the surreal soundscape that will blur the nightmare-like war sounds with her fantasy. For example, the bombing will morph into fireworks, and the anxiety-induced hustle in the hospital will resemble fairies' wing flapping or fairy dancing. By oscillating between the two worlds, we aim to position the audience sonically in a state of anxiety. The themes are connected by the universal sentiments of feeling like we're all just kids deep inside, despite the sometimes tragic, uncontrollable circumstances when growing up. The four themes are dysfunctional upbringing, escapism, war, and childhood. The art direction is intentionally a stripped-down version of what could have been in Nora's heads. The widespread poverty context of the war provided liberty for us to rely on craft and handmade set dressing pieces. We take inspiration from the toys from World War II and we envision charcoal drawings of whimsical imagery on cardboard boxes. Those drawings will be inspired by artwork done by visually impaired artists to reflect Nora's imagination viewed by the outside world.
To follow up on that, creating papier-mâché mushrooms or flowers will also really add to the setting, and it goes within the budget and is pretty cheap and easy to make. And then clothes-wise, we can be using drapes, which are not that difficult to sew and make, and same with the fairy wings as well. To summarize, we will be exploring these fantastical elements through the period elements, aka cheap toys from 1945, or something resembling, to portray how Nora's mind got distorted by the war and portray how she's a dysfunctional adult on screen visually. We will be heavily inspired for our art direction with the period drama pieces. That will be just in a different color palette that better fits our message and our perspective from filmmakers from 2025.
For comparables, we use a variety of different similar movies, similar with the topic, visuals, feasibility, and etc. However, most of those similar with the topic show the perception of blind people from outside rather than within, which makes us unique. Poor Things are giving the same dysfunctional adult, while all the lights we cannot see, and Black gives us the perception of blind people. They've built a maze due to the feasibility of fantasy set, fairy tales due to the topic of fairies, and Pan's Labyrinth for magical realism elements.
Part of our set dress will consist of miniature props to showcase details of Nora's distorted yet Wonderland-esque imagination. Considering her visually impaired circumstances, the miniature will demonstrate how her early memories define what could have been shown on screen. For example, the sewing kit she's being taught to use by the nurse can look like a children's toy. We can have imaginative murals draw on miniature version of the hospital walls. We located one of the key locations to be St. Dunstan Church of the East as the fantasy castle. Hair and makeup will be theatrical, resembling drawings of mythical creatures in children's illustration books.
In terms of distribution, we're tailoring this film for mainly film festivals like Student World Television Society, BFI, Future Film Festival, Sundance, maybe Raindance, and more. Specifically because the film will be exploring a female protagonist and war themes. We believe that this film will do pretty well in the festivals, it's following the current trends in the filmmaking industry. As well, specifically later on, we'll be exploring more specifically fantasy genre film festivals. To summarize, Where the Fairies Smoke is a fantasy genre film that explores a distorted perception on the war reality of a dysfunctional adult, Nora, as she tries to cope with the stress of remaining in the war hospital reality after she was blinded. We see the world through her eyes. We see the fantasy world. However, even that fantasy world acts back on her with the mocking fairies personification that represents her fears and anxieties, represents how her brain got distorted during the war, and in the end she gets scared by the one thing she used to love watching and potentially hear, the fireworks. So the sound she's hearing in the war hospital reality will also further convey the story through sound, and visuals will be referring to pink, purple, and more pastel colored art direction elements that will support the girlhood side of the story as well. And yeah, well, thank you for listening for our pitch.
Alright, and I'm just gonna have end slate. Yeah. Stay there. End slate. Scene 1, slate 4, take 1.
Whatever. I don't know what you want. Can they just leave us alone?